Welcome to Kindred, hosted by me, Kate, and my sister, Jen. In this podcast, we explore our human relationship to the natural world. In connecting to this planet, we also connect to understanding, compassion, and empathy. How can we see ourselves not as separate or above animals in nature, but a critical and integrated part of an active ecosystem? Through conversations with animal advocates, scientists, conservationists, and many others, we look to inspire a new awareness of how and why we connect to animals and nature in order to repair and restore our relationship to the natural world. Hello, and welcome to Kindred. How are you today, Jennifer?
I'm great. Pretty happy that it's a sunny day for a change after the after effects of that Hurricane Ian. Boy, we had a lot of rain.
Yeah. Wow. And our hearts go out to everybody, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Florida, who got hit so just massive, rough, brutal storm. The recovery is going to take a long time. So we've been thinking a lot about them.
Yes. Right. We had the luxury to just be irritated by the rain.
That's right. That's exactly, which we actually really needed. So it was good, but it was lovely to see the sun after a few many days. It's interesting too, just thinking about the weather, and it's we're October, well into our fall here. And I was thinking about just the change of weather, and it's an oddly very busy and yet very nostalgic time for me. I think it takes me back to childhood and school days, and sort of the anticipation of a new year. Spent a lot of time outdoors, and the fall was a beautiful time of year. And it just made me think about the different, things that I would see as a child, like box turtles in the woods, and there's a different feel these days. There's things that I don't really see anymore. And you were talking the other day about how you saw a walking stick.
That was so nostalgic. Like, I don't think I've seen one of those since I was a kid in West Virginia when we were camping. And what an amazing connection to nature they are. I mean, they look literally like sticks that they move. They are just amazing. If you've not seen one, Google it and watch a video, because they're really cool. So
was it a big one or a baby?
It was about 4 inches long. Yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah, that's proper.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Jeez. Yeah, they're some of the coolest insects out there. And like just seeing like Luna moths and things like that I don't see really rarely anymore. But yeah, that is definitely, we should put up a link to a picture of what a walking stick looks like. They're like otherworldly. They're not.
They literally look like twigs. I mean, they don't look like animals, and then all of a sudden they're moving.
Yeah,
so crazy.
Really like
mean, nature is amazing. Yeah,
nature is amazing. Super exotic. And actually, that segues so beautifully into our guest today, which I'm super excited about this conversation because I really love insects. I find them fascinating. And so our guest today is the very dynamic and super smart entomologist, Dr. May Berenbaum. And for those of us that need a reminder of what entomology is, it's the scientific study of insects. So yay, bugs. And May was just an absolute delight to speak with. And her depth of knowledge about all things insects is just, wow, incredible. Like a plethora. I could interview her every single season. So here is a bit of her bio taken from the university's website, University of Illinois, which is sib.illinois.edu. Quote, May Berenbaum, PhD, has been on the faculty of the Department of Entomology at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign since 1980, serving as head since 1992. Her work is focused on characterizing biochemical, genetic, and molecular mechanisms underlying interactions between insects and the plants they consume, including detoxification of natural and synthetic chemicals, and for applying ecological principles in developing sustainable management practices for natural and agricultural communities. End quote.
Wow. I'm not even smart enough to understand what she does.
Yeah, just play it back. Just go back and listen to it a couple times. She breaks it all down in a really understandable way, and a lot of this is in context to her study of honeybees.
Right.
And then in 2014, she was awarded the National Medal of Science, which is incredible. Dr. Berenbaum is prolific and highly published. Her articles and journals are a many, and you can find them on the website. My favorite title is, quote, "Honey, I'm Homemade. Sweet treats from the beehive across the centuries and around the world." And that's published with the University of Illinois Press. I just loved that.
Yeah.
Honey, I'm homemade. That was so cute. Anyway, she was incredible and lovely, and just so enjoyed talking about all things bugs. So let's buzz on over to our conversation with Dr. May Berenbaum, and we'll see you guys at the takeaway.
Okay.
Dr. Berenbaum, welcome to Kindred, and could you please introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Sure, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm May Berenbaum. I'm a professor and head of the Department of Entomology at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, where I've actually been since August 1980.
So, yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. I have long loved insects, and I never really had that like screech reaction to bugs, unless, you know, they're tangled in my hair or on my person and I'm unable to locate them quickly. Then things might definitely get a little jumpy. So I get the knee-jerk reaction to some degree. So I wanted to talk for a minute about why you think in general humans think insects are gross or ominous, or at the least generally just not relevant to our health, one, unless it's negative, or to the health of the planet even.
Well, given the fact that there are more than 1 million described species of insects, full disclosure, there are some that are creepy and gross and threatening. So I think that's part of the problem, is that those are the ones that are often the most familiar to people.
Right.
I mean, there are 4,000 species, by the way, of cockroaches, but very, relatively few actually live in people's homes.
Oh, interesting.
So most live innocuous lives out in, tropical rainforests and the like. Right. So actually, one reason that cockroaches like living with people is that we sort of create a tropical rainforest everywhere we go, with constant high temperatures and relative humidities and lots of food provisions, especially
right.
If you're not too tidy or don't have a regular cleaning service. So
right, of course,
you hardly blame them for sticking close to us.
That's right.
And the other thing is they just look about as different from humans as sort of anything of this planet,
Right.
Very little to relate to in the face of an insect. They don't have eyes that don't blink. They're covered in this sort of suit of armor. They have strange projections coming out of their heads and wings. I mean,
right.
That's something that we haven't pulled off. I don't mean that literally. Some people have pulled off wings, but accomplished, let's say. Exactly. So they look different. They act different. They eat things that are unimaginable to us to eat. And they do, on occasion, get in our way. But I think people generalize too much, and extrapolate from the few bad apples or the few bad apple maggots to the broader community of insects out there.
Right. And I think even, from the maggots to the all of, they may not be beautiful, but there are exceptionally gorgeous insects out there that are just exotic and incredible to look at and to learn about. So then let's talk about how critical insects are to the health of the planet and to us, and how without them, life as we know it would probably literally come to a screeching halt. I mean, what would life be without them?
All right. The question is, how would we live on this planet without insects?
Yeah, what would the planet and life be like without them?
What people often don't take into consideration when they think about how we interact with insects is that the fact that they provide what are called ecosystem services. And that might not be a familiar concept to people, but basically ecosystem services are the benefits that people get from the natural world. Okay. And we have enjoyed these benefits for a very long time before anyone ever bothered to sort of catalog them or monetize them. So I think the biggest change in attitudes toward insects in recent years has been a result of an effort on the part of ecologists and economists to figure out just exactly what it's worth to us that they are going about their business.
Right.
That's this concept of ecosystems. So there are four main classes of ecosystem services. There are what are called provisioning services. That includes products that they provide. Regulating services, those are benefits from regulating natural processes in the world. And then cultural services, like art and music and literature and poetry. And you mentioned beautiful insects. So the sort of aesthetic part of human life. And finally, supporting services that undergird all the other services. So insects are involved in every way. I mean, people are familiar with some of the products that insects make, maybe less familiar with others, but of course, honey and wax are well recognized to be important contributions of honeybees.
For sure.
Long time, honey was like the world's preferred sweetener. There are very few substances that are so naturally sweet and so easy to gather if you can overlook the stings than honey. But there are many other products. There are drugs that have been that originate from insects. There are food. There are millions of people in the world who eat insects. They're not all quite as fastidious or fussy as Western Europe and North America. And they, in terms of supporting services, they are food for so many other organisms that we depend on. Immature birds, most birds, songbirds, depend on insects to feed their nestlings.
Right.
Fish, huge proportion of fish and game, all kinds of animals. Even grizzly bears are known to eat insects and on occasion. So the rest of the natural world that people recognize as being valuable in terms of products wouldn't be there without insects to provide them the energy and nutrition that they need. In terms of regulating services, their insects are critical in regulating plant populations. They can do this in a number of ways. Through pollination, they facilitate plant reproduction.
Right.
That's for 90% of the world's flowering plants. Something on the order of 300,000 species depend on an animal partner to bring about pollination and fertilization. So they're, plants are rooted in the ground. So they can't bring the male parts together with the female parts on their own. And they need some sort of animal that's mobile that can move their gametes around, the pollen is basically sperm, flower sperm.
Yeah.
And insects with their wings are exceedingly well equipped to deliver with great precision a pollen grain to an awaiting flower.
Mhm.
So that's, if you like flowers and
Right.
fruit, yeah, for that matter, most of our healthiest foods, are fruits and nuts and vegetables. Everything from, I don't know, artichokes to zinnias, or what's down back, watermelon, all kinds of products of pollination. And then they also contribute some important nutrient cycling services. Not very glamorous, but they're among the world's most important garbage recyclers and manure recyclers and carrion decomposers.
Right.
So, I mean, it would be a pretty grim place if none of the dung was buried or broken down and all the dead bodies just sat there. So,
yes.
That we have insects to thank for not having to negotiate a landscape littered with dead things.
That's right.
It's true. There are insects that have certain enzymes that are very rare otherwise, that can break down the keratin that is in hair and nails and claws, and can break down collagen and connective tissues. And, so they're among the very few organisms capable of clearing the landscape of junk, garbage,
right.
detritus. And they burrow through soil, they aerate the soil and keep the soil fertile. They can clear water, filter feeders, and larval stages of immature insects can clarify water, and in addition to being food for the rest of the food web. So, and then finally, and I'm glad you did bring them up, they do provide inspiration and bring a little beauty into the world.
Yeah.
Some of them.
Yeah, I love that perspective of, you were saying, poetry and art, and they're super inspiring. And among the things that it really is just hitting me when you're saying, like, they're the cleanup crew of all the dead things, and when you put it that way, you're like, oh my gosh, you think of, like, you see if a bird's out in the lawn, it's sort of over time just sort of disappearing. That's not magically happening. That is insects. And I think like when you think of it that way, or like, oh my goodness, what would our job be? We might think bugs are gross, but that's way grosser. And the other thing you're talking about too is, I'm kind of thinking of it in terms of like the economics of insects, which is also something that never really crossed my mind. And in context to like insect conservation, we often think about economics in terms of like food production and climate change, but not in context to insect biodiversity loss. So can you talk to us a little bit about what you mean by the economics in context to insects?
Sure. Well, I mean, there's two ways to look at biodiversity. There's species diversity, and then there is sort of biomass diversity. So how many pounds or tons of insects are produced? And people often sort of conflate the two, that assuming that I remember I mentioned that birds feed their nestlings insects. Well, not all insects are the same,
right?
And not interchangeable. There are some, for example, they're poisonous and are not suitable food for nestlings. And same thing with pollination. And some of those, the relationships, those partnerships between pollinator and flower are extremely specific. And that affects, in fact, the diversity of our diet. When figs were brought over from the Mediterranean to be farmed for the first time in the U.S. and in California in the late 19th century, took 10 years for the erstwhile fig growers to figure out that they were not going to be able to produce a certain type of fig, like Smyrna figs, without bringing over a tiny little wasp. Is the only known pollinator of fig flowers. Wow. Fig flowers are constructed in a very peculiar way. They actually, they're kind of internalized in, well, it's called a caprifig. It's not a real fruit, but it has it has flowers that actually provide food for the wasps that are the pollinators. They are tiny. They crawl in through a tiny little hole in this sort of sac that holds them, and they are, again, they can fit through the eye of a needle. That's how small they are.
Wow.
And each species of fig, genus Ficus, has typically one or two species of fig wasp that are specific for that particular fig species.
Yeah.
So without bringing the fig wasp over, and without bringing the fig trees that contain these so-called capra figs, no figs for sale, no figs for fig Newton. So it didn't happen until they figured out the insect's life cycle and could bring it over. And there are dozens of examples of that level of specificity. Insects are not interchangeable. They're not like rivets in holding a machine together.
Right.
And we might not appreciate the differences between and among species, but living communities recognize the differences.
Yeah, and that's such a great example of just the intricacy that makes up and is part of these ecosystems, where that's an incredible story. Just like the little tiny things that you take one little piece out and you're not able to grow a whole crop of many things. You said there's lots of examples of that. And you were talking about chocolate, and before in the we spoke before about the cacao bean, or the cocoa bean, however you say that. But just like we wouldn't have chocolate without a very specific, intricate, reciprocal relationship between plants and insects. And I think many of us just it doesn't impact us on a daily level of understanding that. Could we live without chocolate? Some of us couldn't, and most of us would prefer not to, but it's not could we, it's what else would be affected if we remove insects from the whole story. So what are some of the main influencers that are threatening insects, and what are some ways that we in our own little ecosystems can support insects in our local communities?
Well, I was an author on a paper published last year, which basically it was insect decline in the Anthropocene, death by 1,000 cuts.
Oh, right.
Our effort to explain that it's not one massive, not like an asteroid colliding with Earth, but it's, just countless changes we humans have made to that have altered the natural world in such a way that it has made many insect lifestyles difficult, if not impossible to pursue.
Yeah.
So there are some that are, agricultural intensification is one, where more and more land is going into is going into agriculture, is heavily managed. It's monoculture cropping systems, which don't have the diversity of resources that most insect species need. Pollinators don't feed on the pollen or nectar of a single flower. Honeybees, for example, need a diversity of flowers because they're active. They maintain their colonies of 30 to 50,000 individuals from early May on, at least here in central Illinois, through October. So they need different flowers at different times of year.
Right.
And if not, then the whole system essentially collapses. So it's not one size fits all in terms of their needs. And we have historically, since the agricultural revolution in the last 10,000 years, found it's easier for us to plant one crop over a large area, makes it easier for us to plant and to harvest, but it does reduce the diversity of the landscape. Right. And not to mention the fact that we also reduce the diversity of the landscape by using pesticides and insecticides, fungicides, fertilizers. All of these disrupt the chemical dynamics that support ecosystems. Deforestation is another. So often those are partnered. So forests are cleared to expand agriculture. And again, deforestation that is advancing at an alarming rate. Something on the order of 85% of the 1 million plus species of insects live in tropical areas of the world, tropical or subtropical worlds, parts of the world. And that's where some of the most extensive deforestation is taking place. So we don't even know what the diversity is there, and we're losing it.
Yeah.
All kinds of activities, urbanization, light pollution, particulate pollution in the atmosphere, just, our lifestyles, our energy intensive lifestyles, alter those dynamics for insects. Fireflies, for example, in areas where there's constant night illumination, artificial light at night, disrupts their ability to court and find mates, with their flashing.
Yeah.
And, it's the little things that you wouldn't think would have an impact on the natural world. And they do. And insects are kind of the first ones. I mean, they're the first ones whose responses are noticeable.
Yeah.
And the thing to remember about insects too is the reason there's 1 million plus species is they've, evolved over time about 1 million different ways to live on planet Earth. And if we're losing them, then we are diminishing the ability of the planet to sustain life.
Right. And there's a reason why there's 1 million of them, because there's 1 million little different roles that they play, and they're all critical.
And they're very good at what they do. And of course, it would be remiss of me not to mention climate change, which, and some of the most dramatic examples of impacts of climate change involve insects changing their ranges, their distributions, and their numerical abundance. So climate change, for example, affects, as we are seeing all too clearly these days, fire intensity and drought.
Right.
And another thing that, so storm intensity is increasing, fire intensity is evidently increasing. Droughts are we're in the midst of in the Western U.S. of one of the longest droughts in recorded history.
Yeah.
So the effects of climate change are very multifactorial.
That's right. That's right.
And they combine. That's the 1,000 cuts part. So.
Yes. When you mentioned like deforestation and then fire, the combination of those two too, and you don't hear, which I get, but it's, it's the loss of the natural habitat. We don't often talk about, or the media, I would say, doesn't talk about, where all the raging forest fires, and because they're so hot and so intense and so massive, the loss is epic. And then that all has to be reproduced, and insects are a huge part of that, which we just, I guess they're not that glamorous or whatever it is, but they're so critical, and they should be glamorized in the sense of look at what also we have lost, not just our homes and our that sort of thing.
And some people also don't realize the implications of some of the impacts of changes in distribution and abundance of insects.
Right.
For example, global warming. There are insects that depend on cold temperatures. That's, they have a life cycle that has a programmed part that allows them to, withstand winter conditions in sort of a state of suspended animation. And some of these cold adapted insects are having trouble adjusting to the relatively rapid increases in temperatures. Bumblebees, for example, tend to be, more abundant in temperate areas than in tropical areas, and they're sort of sewn into their winter underwear. They're very good at cold temperatures. They can they live on mountaintops, and they in alpine communities or Arctic communities. And the problem they're having is those are getting too warm. So on a mountain, the bumblebees can keep going higher to get back to colder, temperatures that were more common half century ago.
Right.
But eventually they run out of mountain.
Right.
And as well, some of the ranges are shifting northward. Mm-hmm. So in order to match their physiological adaptations to the environments. Another thing about temperature change is that it can bust up the synchrony of interactions. So that pollinators and plants, that's an obvious one. So if a flower responds differently to increasing temperatures than its pollinator, then it will flower at a time when the pollinator is not available. And that does nobody any good.
Yep.
And it's not just pollinators and plants. There's also parasitic wasps, tiny parasitic wasps that lay their eggs inside the body of other insects. And they tend to be, not surprisingly, very specific. It's kind of a hard thing to grow inside a host and not kill off your host while you're growing and consuming all the energy and resources it's eating.
Right.
So parasitoids tend to be very, very host specific. And the unpredictability that accompanies climate change can interfere with the synchrony that allows these parasitic wasps to find and exploit those host caterpillars and the like. That's
incredible. Yeah, it just goes on and on. I think a lot of the natural world is feeling that the cold thing really, it's very real. And a lot of the natural world is feeling the same effects. So I grew up with a mother who kept bees, and my sister Jen has kept bees for years. So we love them lots and lots here. And you had mentioned bees and bumblebees earlier. And we know how critical they are to our health. And I think the general public is really getting that to our health and that of the planet. Just was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your current research with bees.
Sure, happy to.
Great.
Many people study bees for many different reasons. The bees actually, the honeybee genome was actually sequenced before the genome of the second insect genome to be sequenced. The first was Drosophila melanogaster, the fruit fly of college genetic courses,
right?
Because it's been a model for understanding genetics since the early 20th century. It's very well known genetically. Many mutations have been categorized and the like. So it was logical that was the first. The second was honeybee in 2006, and that was before the cow genome was sequenced. So that's kind of a reflection of how important honeybees are.
Right.
They're a model for human behavior in that they have this very uncharacteristic social behavior, uncharacteristic for insects at least.
Right.
You can't really experiment on people, but you can look for commonalities in the behavior of honeybees and the behavior of humans without crossing an ethical line.
Right.
I'm interested in my original interest stems from my interest in general, how plants protect themselves from plant feeding insects.
Oh, right.
And, again, it's like they can't run around to find a sexual partner. They can't run away from their enemies, and they can't wrestle their enemies to the ground. So
that's right.
Most plants produce toxic substances to discourage herbivores from consuming them. And I find this incredibly fascinating. These are natural pesticides.
Yeah.
So for a long time, I've looked at how plants make these natural pesticides and why their chemical defenses last so much longer than what we invent to keep insects from eating plants, like insecticides.
Right.
Insects develop resistance with astonishing rapidity to chemicals that we invent. DDT existed only in a chemist's shelf. It was sort of synthesized in a laboratory in the late 19th century. Its insecticidal properties were discovered in 1939. It was used throughout World War II to basically, among other things, very spectacularly stopped a typhus epidemic in Italy, and was released to the public in 1945. And by 1947, there were houseflies that were resistant to DDT.
Wow.
A chemical that did not exist on Earth, before a chemist synthesized it, Otto Ziegler, in the late 19th century.
Wow.
So, but plants, I studied a group of plants in the carrot family, Apiaceae, and this group makes a group of a class of chemicals called phenocoumarins. Don't need to memorize the name or anything, but casual contact with the skin causes blistering. They actually can intercalate, get between two DNA strands and cross-link them, and then interfere with replication. So they're really very toxic. They're carcinogenic.
Yeah.
There are, the plants are not affected by them, and they make them, but there's a whole suite of insects, of caterpillars that I've been studying, that feed on nothing but plants that contain this chemical, because insects evolve so rapidly. They have evolved defenses, mostly enzymes that can break down toxins. Mm-hmm. This is a long-winded way of getting around to saying I'm interested in how, biochemically, insects that eat plants break down these natural pesticides, and these are the same enzymes that they use to break down synthetic pesticides,
right?
These natural pesticides.
Yeah.
So that's how I arrived at bees. Bees are, that you think of them as feeding on harmless nectar and pollen, and to extent that's correct. Nectar is a tissue made by plants only to reward a pollinator. It serves no useful function in the life of the plant itself, only in relation to a pollinator. So that tends to be relatively non-toxic, but plants have a vested interest in restricting the availability of their nectar to a legitimate pollinator, because there are many insects out there that are called nectar robbers or nectar thieves. Very judgmental language, but that's what's in the literature. Like some bumblebees will go to a flower where the nectar is deep inside a long tube,
right?
And a proper pollinator inserts a proboscis into the long tube and then gets dusted with pollen grains on the way down. Well, some bumblebees can go around the long tube and cut a slit in the base of the flower and just suck the nectar directly without going away covered in pollen.
Very tricky.
So
rude.
Again, they can't, wrestle these bumblebees away, but there are some nectars that actually contain toxins. And honeybees, which feed broadly on so many different plants, have to have the metabolic capability of processing these toxins.
Fascinating.
And that's how I got into bees, because they are plant feeders, just like caterpillars, but they just eat different plant tissues. They eat pollen and nectar. Caterpillars feed on anything. Certain pollen. Again, they're very specific. Most pollinators, most caterpillars will feed on 3 or fewer caterpillar species, feed on 3 or fewer plant families. Mm-hmm. So they're very particular. They would starve. The caterpillars that eat carrot leaves, for example, or parsnip flowers, would starve rather than eat grass. That's why those little kids, I hate to tell them when they get a jar and punch holes in the lid and then throw in grass, they're just, the monarch caterpillars are going to starve to death.
Right.
Yeah.
And
that's how there's a million of them. They specialize. They're very, very good at a pretty narrow range of things.
Exactly.
So I'm very interested in this. It's called insect plant coevolution, how it's like an arms race where the plants make defenses, the insects can evolve adaptations that allow them to circumvent those defenses, which exerts selection pressure on the plants to evolve new classes of chemicals, and it goes on and on.
Right.
I find that really interesting, and I have to say I'm a vegetarian, so I can relate to the challenges of eating plant food.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, same. So you had said earlier, we're talking about how bees, it's interesting because I hadn't thought of that way. Maybe humans, they're such a good ambassador for insects, right? Because we can see ourselves in them, in their highly complicated way that they live with each other and how they communicate with each other. It's just in their GPS system. I mean, they're incredible little creatures. If people don't know about bees, just Google a little bit of them, you'll be amazed immediately. So can you talk a little bit about what life within the hive is like so they're all out there pollinating and then they bring it back and then what happens?
Well, they're not all out there.
Okay.
Only the oldest, most experienced bees, adult bees, are the ones that go out. So the honeybees, again, their social behavior is really extraordinary. Each adult bee, undergoes a sort of a developmental period. When they first come out as adults, they have sort of the tedious in-hive chores like cleaning up stuff. When they get a little older, then they can process honey. So they're there in the hive when the foragers come back, loads of nectar and pollen, and they're in the hive, and their job is to convert the nectar into honey and then pack it up for storage, or the pollen into bee bread. They can be then. They also at around that age will become nurses and take care of the offspring.
Interesting.
Brood that are helpless little larvae that live in wax cells.
Right. What's the honeycomb? What we call honeycomb.
Honeycomb, exactly. And eventually, when they're old enough, they're about 2 weeks old or more, they will go out into the great wide world and look for pollen and nectar. And then, as you said, when they find a good source, they'll go back to the hive and communicate to their nestmates exactly where it is. It's astonishingly precise. They orient in relation to polarized light, so they can always tell from which direction the sun is. So they find a place and will come back, and then using this flat surface, upright surface of the honeycomb as sort of a proxy for a map, they will dance. They call it a dance. So they'll move in and convey in a symbolic language, basically in what direction the nectar source is and how much energy it takes to get there or how far away it is. And they do this by basically it's either a figure eight or a round dance. There are many other dances that they do, as people are discovering, but
right.
This is incredible. I get lost, as soon as I leave town and on country roads. I don't know where I am. Bees always seem to know where they are, unless it's cloudy and they can't orient by the sun,
right?
Or it's raining, but even so, what they can do is just astonishing.
And I don't know if this is accurate or at all, but their level of intelligence in their communication reminds me of ants a little bit too. They're also incredible communicators. So one question I have, and this might be a myth, but us beekeeping people, meaning my family, not myself, but we are under the belief that honey is, there's no expiration date on honey, that you can eat it forever. And there's stories of honey being found in the tombs, Egyptian tombs, with the buried pharaohs. And, it probably really is the nectar of the gods type idea. One, is that true? Two,
actually it is to an extent.
Okay. Like, what is the phenomena of the never ending honey that, my mom had a jar that was from 1985. She found in her basement. So I found the last jar of honey. Do you want it? And I said, yes. And I ate it and it was amazing. So that was,
Well, this is sort of bee chemical engineering or just straight up biochemistry. They're among the very, very, very few animals that store food for times of dearth. And to do that, you have to make sure the food doesn't spoil. And the process of turning nectar into honey, just about every step is to ensure that it won't spoil, that it won't be contaminated by microbes. So the first thing they do, they bring it back and they evaporate it down, they concentrate it. It goes from, nectar's about, just say 90% water. Then the foragers will bring it back, transfer it to the honey makers, who will then suck it up, spit it out on their tongues, up and down, fanning their wings 200 times a second. And that helps drive down the water till it's about 18% water. And then it's a super saturated sugar solution, which means it is so super saturated, there's not enough water in honey to promote the growth of bacteria or yeasts. So it is basically, that's one step that they take that makes it inimical to spoilage. Now, all bets are off if you even introduce a little bit of water rather, into the honey.
Right.
So don't lick the spoon and put it in the jar, because even that, it's gross. Beside that, it will also leave the honey vulnerable to spoilage. Another thing they do, biochemical reaction, they jam even more sugars into this solution by taking sucrose, which is table sugar.
Yep.
Sucrose is what's called a disaccharide. It has two single sugars that are attached together, glucose and fructose.
Okay.
So bees have an enzyme called invertase that breaks the bond that connects them. Okay. So instead of one molecule of sugar, of sucrose, you end up with 2 molecules of a kind of sugar. Okay. So that packs in even more molecules to make it even more super saturated. Another thing they do is, one of those sugars is glucose. Right. And they convert, they oxidize glucose and turn it into glyconic acid. That turns it into an acid. And the acid lowers the pH of the incipient honey, which also reduces microbial growth. And the process of oxidation generates a molecule called hydrogen peroxide. Oh. Which is an antibacterial agent. So they are making, they're lowering the pH, they're making hydrogen peroxide, they are making a super saturated solution. And then they, remember I was talking about how plants don't want just anyone consuming their nectar. Yes. So plants don't want microbes stealing their nectar from true pollinators either. So many nectars contain antimicrobial substances. So bees bringing in nectars from different flowers also bring in those antimicrobial, they're called phytochemicals, the plant chemicals. So all those things they do to honey, or to the nectar to make it into honey, make honey basically storable forever unless you stick a spoon of water in it. And one of the reasons too that mead is a honey wine. It's probably the first fermented beverage, because it's so easy to make it ferment. All you do is add a little water. Right. And then all bets are off. That's right. And interestingly, there are even fermentative bacteria associated with bees and wasps. The yeast that we've used as humans to ferment beverages for millennia, I guess, nobody exactly was sure of the entire life cycle. Where do yeasts go in the winter when the fruits are frozen? Where do these specific yeasts go? Well, it turns out some of them live inside the bodies of queen wasps, for example, that do overwinter. So they associate with the wasps and bees during the summer months, and then they hide out inside the bodies of overwintering queen wasps or bees. Wow. Yeah. So we owe them a lot. So, I mean, my last question is a really big, broad question. So answer it as short as you like. I just wondered, even just reflecting back on what we talked about. I mean, I think what we've talked about is the answer to the question, but it's the idea of how can we sort of reframe how we talk about insects and broaden our anthropocentric view of them is really the really critical going forward. Well, I think the key is to understand how much they do contribute to the functionality of living communities. Yeah. On terrestrial Earth. The insects have not made many inroads in marine environments, but they do run the terrestrial planet. Yeah. Even though they're small, I mean, just because they're small does not mean they're insignificant. Yes. And I'm not, I don't like mosquitoes any more than the next person, but I do recognize that a lot of fish do like mosquitoes. and birds as well, dragonflies, and they are a critical component of many food webs.
Yeah,
And just
right.
they drag us into them. But
Right.
yeah, so I'm not unrealistic. I don't think everybody should love every insect. I don't. But just think of what, for how many millennia, how many eons they've kept much of the world running.
Yep.
And we should think about that when we casually destroy the places they live.
That's right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I think I told you when we talked last that when I first thought about doing the podcast, speaking with an entomologist was the top 5. So it took season 3, but we found you. And thank you so much for what you do and the way you do it. And I just find it fascinating. And there's just a lot of there's a lot of beauty, there's a lot of humor in the bug world. And I think, partly why Disney likes to feature them in lots of their movies. So,
right.
Thank you just so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for speaking up for the bugs.
Hey guys, we are back with a takeaway from Dr. May Berenbaum, one of my all-time favorite conversations. She was such a joy to speak with. Like you had said, her knowledge is endless and her sense of humor is fantastic. And it's just such a great conversation about bugs, which I love. So I'm just going to start with the first thing that I really hit me, and it's really so much of why we even do this podcast, is when she talked about ecosystem services and right, which is the benefits humans get from the natural world. What I really sat with that for a while was how insects benefit us, and just the list is so long, right? About what they offer us, from plants, food, to how they help keep balance within an ecosystem. I love that she pointed out how they feature in culture, which is like arts and so many different levels in the arts world. And that's really so much of the point here, right? That what we get to do, which is living and breathing, because of the animal and plant kingdoms, and how much they enrich our lives. From the reason we have chocolate is because of them. She talked about the figs in the trees, and just all the different things that we get from the natural world that we don't have to also deal with, right? Like the fact that how super gross and actually uninhabitable this planet would be without the decomposing services that insects give us, right? Like you don't think about what isn't out in your yard because of insects. It's not just like vultures are great, right? And carrion birds, they take care of a lot of that. And like possums, they take care of a lot of the dead stuff and the detritus. But
so do bugs.
Right. So do insects. And, even in the conversation, and you and I, you had just mentioned it when we were chatting, like you had a bird outside, a dead bird, right? And you moved it, and there's all these ants and insects underneath, like working away at this dead animal. And just take a minute to think about how many deer would be stacked up in my property.
Yeah.
If it weren't for them.
I know. And I literally don't think I realized that ants are part of that. Like I was like, oh, ants. Like you think of some bugs, it makes sense, but I was surprised that ants were helping to biodegrade this little baby sparrow. I just kind of, I'm sure I knew it at one time, but I don't think about it.
Right,
It just happened.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right. You don't think about it because you
Right.
don't have to think about it.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
bow to the bugs, people, please. Let's take a minute.
Yeah.
The other one little tiny thing that I thought was so cute, and she only mentioned it for 1 second, was about bumblebees and
I love this.
and their winter underwear.
Yes, she said, I'm going to quote, they're sewn into their winter underwear, so they can't like take it off. I was thinking that too. I thought that was so cute how she said they were sewn into their winter underwear.
Right. And also what I thought was interesting about that was I have noticed in the last few years a lot of dying bumblebees. And I haven't looked this up at all. I've done no back research on this, but it just hit me doing this takeaway that is that why they're not living as long, because they're just too damn warm.
Yeah.
Because I've heard other people mention like, yeah, I've seen bumblebees dying. Like, so I'm curious about that. I'm going to look that up. But winter underwear, so cute. Oh my gosh.
Really cute.
I think the last thing, which is sort of the biggest thing too, is honey and how it's actually made, production process by plants, and the harvesting process by bees. So I'm gonna get this wrong, but as much as I could take away from what she was saying, and so the question was like, my question was, why doesn't honey go bad, right? Like, why is it a forever food? And she broke it all down. It's part of her research. But that honey is basically super saturated sugar, and there isn't enough water to grow yeast or bacteria.
Right.
And also, it has a low pH because of bees in the process, which reduces microbial growth. And then there's also a process of oxidation that produces hydrogen peroxide, which is also an antibacterial agent. Okay, the list goes on.
Yeah.
And then even before all of that, and this is what again blows my mind, plants produce nectar with antimicrobial substances. Like, what the frick? Like,
right.
From the start to the honey sitting on my counter, this reciprocal relationship is so intricate and so chemically based. Like, they're like little chemists, these bees, and like how like plants produce a natural insecticide totally blows my mind. That whole process to me is absolutely nuts.
Oh, it really is. And the perfection in the system that we are only starting to understand. That's the thing that I keep coming back to too, is that we are just, thanks to really smart people like her, starting to just be able to get into this stuff, and see this, the effects of what's been going on for millennia, basically. It's just, mind blowing.
It really is. And, I think, again, it's that very delicate balance too, right? If there aren't certain plants producing certain nectar for certain bees, then there isn't honey, right? But then it's like the sort of the back, and if you kind of walk backwards, what does that actually mean? That's happening in the landscape and in the fields and all of the different things. The implications are huge, and it is such a balance. So yeah, that kind of blew my mind. And then again, back to the natural insecticide and the research that's being done there, and how, plants create this insecticide to keep the quote unquote bad bugs away, right? They keep the little thieves away, so that I think ultimately they can give it to the bees and the pollinators that are going to ultimately help them as well, right?
Right. They're going to do good with it rather than just, take the robbers or the thieves or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what did you have? What
some similar things for sure. Like that whole thing, I felt like when she was talking about the services that insects provide, I sort of felt like I was reading a concierge list. Here's all the things, all the services you can get at the hotel of insects, and just that same kind of thing, that how we don't really realize, not only pollinators, but the garbage recyclers, and how they're insects that clean water. Like I had never.
Filter. Yeah, right.
They can make water clear, and it's like, wow. And I really loved the fig story, because I actually have a fig tree in my garden, and for the last couple of years it hasn't produced any figs, and this year it is. And so when I heard this, I'm like, those little wasps must have found me, and they must not have been here before, because they didn't know I had it. And just how clever, now I have all these figs.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So that was very interesting. And I loved also that she was saying, when she was talking about the threats to insects, that it's not one event, it's all these little things that are happening.
That's called the 1,000 cuts.
Yes, exactly. And just that I was thinking about the when she was talking about the monoculture, and just how damaging that is. And again, it's like, it goes back to, for me, these great ideas we have as human beings. This will be a much better way and much more efficient. And we just don't think of the all the effects. The other thing I loved when she was talking about light pollution, because I've only thought of it in terms of migratory birds, because it's been on my mind before, but the fireflies, and how they need it to be dark so they can go bing, bing.
Yes.
That's part of their mating process. And if there's not enough darkness for anyone to see them, that the fancy guy who's like, hey, I'm here, and nobody can tell because it's too freaking light outside. I was just like, oh my gosh. It kind of breaks my heart. And but then she was also saying about what I really loved, when she was talking about, with climate change, if now a flower is blooming at a different time than the species that's supposed to be there to, it messes everything up. And that one's there, like the timing can be wrong for this ecosystem to flourish because of climate change and those subtle changes that are happening.
That was super interesting. And again, just back to the intricate balance, and how sort of delicate, if one thing changes, it really kind of knocks everybody off the block.
And just what it made me think is that sweet little nature, with a capital N, I guess, over and over and over again, adapting to these ways that we are throwing cogs in the wheel of it running smoothly. And it just made me feel bad.
Well, and I love that point that you make, because like you said, we keep throwing all these curveballs at them, and they keep readjusting to make it work or not. Right? So there's a point where they can't evolve quick enough or change fast enough to keep that ecosystem that they're operating in balance. And that's part of the problem. So
I do think that's where we are. Yeah. They can't tap dance fast enough now. You know what I mean? I just kept thinking about the book Braiding Sweetgrass, when she was talking about, the monoculture, thinking about how actually plants need other plants to be able to grow strong and tall, and for bugs to be balanced, and for, there's just all these things that all these scientists and researchers and authors and things that we've talked to, and just every single time they're all saying the same thing. We just can't keep walking so unconsciously through life, I feel like, is
absolutely
the message. I mean, we can, but there will be dire consequences.
And there are. That's the whole thing. It's exactly right. We are unconscious, and there are dire consequences happening. And once in a while you hear of, well, that's the last of that species. So whoopsie.
Yeah.
And I will end on this thought, that even May Berenbaum says it's gross to lick the spoon and put it back in your honey jar. So
she's not wrong.
She's not wrong. So you've heard it. This is the final word.
Not only is it gross, it'll wreck your honey. So there you go.
So thank you for that, May, because that's my biggest takeaway. Don't be gross. All right, guys. Well, what a fun conversation, and thanks for joining us again this week. And we'll see you all soon. Lots of love.
Bye.
Kindred is hosted by me and my sister Jen, produced by Kat Gaddy and myself, sound production and editing by Dan Cooper, original music by Ellie Grace, and our Kindred artwork was created by Lindsay Coffin. Please follow, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and feel free to contact us through our website at kindredpodcast.co, where you can also find links to our socials, Patreon page, and show notes.